The goal here is not to shut down the government. The goal is to stop these horrific practices of organizations selling baby parts.
You put the budget stuff together with that moral issue, and our leadership doesn't move on it, the rest of the country is just going to say, all right, that's it, right? We're fed up. It's tsunami time. Throw everybody out.
House Republicans sharply divided about whether to threaten a government shutdown, over defunding of Planned Parenthood. And we're back now with the panel. Well, we asked you for questions for the panel, and we got this from Karen Margrave on Facebook. She writes, the GOP cowered on preventing the deal with Iran. Does anyone think they will actually defund Planned Parenthood? The GOP is a total disappointment. Brit, how do you answer Karen?
I would say that Karen speaks for legions of disappointed Republicans. I think she's wrong that they cowered on Iran. There's a widespread belief that actually if they wanted to, they could have made this executive agreement into a treaty. The idea that defunding Planned Parenthood against the wishes of a sitting president with enough votes to sustain any vetoes he might cast, even if it leads to a government shutdown, is a path to victory, is crazy. Every time that we get down to this, if the government closes, and it's always only a partial shutdown, the Republican Party gets blamed because people want the government cut down perhaps, but not shut down. The party's standing in the polls begins to sink like a rock. Disaffected Republicans like Karen would argue, oh, if they just stuck to their guns, they'd win in the end. There's no evidence to support that. No government shutdown, John Kasich to the contrary, has ever led to anything good for the Republicans. So it's a suicide mission.
Direct your emails to Mr. Hume. Julie, we've got 2.5 weeks till a possible shutdown, till the government runs out of money, the budget runs out. What do White House officials think that House Republicans will do, and would they like to see a shutdown? Do they agree with Brit that if it happens, all it's going to do is hurt Republicans and help Democrats?
Well, they don't want to see a shutdown because what we learned from the 2013 shutdown is basically it's a pox on both your houses. Everybody takes some blame.
This was the Ted Cruz Obamacare shutdown.
Exactly. So the White House feels like they've got a bit of momentum this year. The president's on a bit of a roll with his agenda, so they don't want to shut down to halt that. At the same time, given the fact that they feel like they do have some momentum, I think it's very difficult to imagine the president making some kind of major concession to Republicans, particularly on something like Planned Parenthood. So if House Republicans are going to go down that road, I think they're more than happy to let them do that.
Added to the Republican frustration over defunding Planned Parenthood, you've also got the frustration over the fact that President Obama's Iran nuclear deal went through this week over the objections of a lot of Republicans, and there was an interesting exchange between the two Senate leaders. Here it is.
The president may have the luxury of vacating office in a few months, but many of our responsibilities extend beyond that time.
I guess we're going to be in a position like on Affordable Care Act. We're going to try to repeal it 60 times, going to try to break that record.
George, conservative voters would say the Republicans came to them and said in 2010, support us, and they got the House. Republican leaders came to them in 2014 and said support us, and they got control of the Senate, and yet the Iran deal goes through. Can you understand why those voters would be fed up?
Absolutely, and they're fed up about two things, as you pointed out. Iran is partly everyone's fault because, as Brit said, it should be a treaty. When they put in place the Corker-Cardin framework, it was going to be treated as not a treaty. It was going to be approved without being approved by either house. So that was a mistake. Planned Parenthood, though.
But a mistake by whom?
By the Senate itself as an institutional body. Democrats and Republicans alike forfeited their constitutional responsibilities.
George, suppose it's an executive agreement. That's how he negotiated it, which leaves Congress with no voice of any kind and no vote of any kind. There's no two-thirds requirement for an executive agreement. So apart from Corker, what could Congress have done?
Well, you could have, part of this frustration on the part of the Republican base and of people generally in the country is that there's no articulation of alternatives. For example, they could have embarrassed the Democrats into saying that your senators would take an oath to support the Constitution, and this is a fundamentally anti-constitutional move. Same is true with Planned Parenthood. You might lose on Planned Parenthood, but you could in the process break up the 12 appropriations bills, attach Planned Parenthood to every one of them, let him veto it 12 times, demonstrate to the country that he's willing to do almost anything to preserve the right of Planned Parenthood to go about its butchery.
So would you support a government shutdown?
No, of course not. Here's what I would support, though. I think.
Well, wait a minute. But you just were saying attach it to every appropriations bill and let him veto it.
He vetoes it, and then you have to take it out. But 12 times he has to go before the country and say the most important thing to me is to preserve the right of Planned Parenthood to continue what it's doing. The caroms of history are so interesting. When those people set out to make those videos of Planned Parenthood, they didn't set out to change the Senate rules. They might have that effect, because we are now at a critical mass of frustration where Republicans are going to say, all right, the filibuster does indeed nullify congressional elections, and we may have to change that radically.
All right. Meanwhile, President Obama, as a result of all this, has now passed his prime domestic accomplishment, Obamacare, without a single Republican vote, and will have, in effect, passed his Iran nuclear deal, his prime foreign policy accomplishment, without a single Republican vote. Juan, whatever happened to the man, the president who was going to bring us together?
Well, I don't think you can blame him. I mean, clearly the politics that you've just seen between Brit and George is there's a huge anger on the right and about the failure of Congress to confront this president, display anger at the president. We saw some of it this week, Chris, when you had Ted Cruz and Donald Trump out there militating against the Iran deal. And you have Republicans who want to punish Speaker Boehner and Majority Leader McConnell for being squishes and rhinos.
But you honestly don't think that President Obama deserves any responsibility, I was about to say blame, for the fact that his two major accomplishments, he couldn't bring a single Republican over?
Well, let's look at Obamacare. Individual mandate was a Republican idea, but Republicans unified, as you pointed out, they were given control of the House because of anger over Obamacare. They could not afford to antagonize the base by saying, oh yeah, well, there's some elements, let's work with this president.
But Obamacare was passed before 2010.
No, but I'm saying they had the opportunity to work with this president. They didn't do it. He then, I will say this, he then responds with, well, if you have disdain for me, I will show disdain for you. So that's, the kumbaya definitely went out the door, but that's been a long time ago.
So, Brit, it's all the Republicans' fault? They did it first?
Well, of course not. I mean, speaking of Obamacare, just to cite one example, in substantive terms, in the construction of that bill, the Republicans were given nothing. Now, you may say that the individual mandate was a Republican idea. It was actually an idea that came out of a conservative think tank. But apart from Mitt Romney, it was not embraced by the Republican Party in any broad way. And the things that the Republicans might have wanted in the bill that might have enticed and indeed almost forced some of them to vote for it, tort reform, sale across state lines and so on, were never included in the bill. He gave them no reason to come along, which is how you do it. You know, you offer something to the other side and you get them to come along. It never happened. So their unanimous opposition is no surprise, and he basically made it come out that way.
I think it's really sad that he doesn't have any support. I think it tells you about the polarization of American politics at this moment, but I do think that it was a conservative idea.
Thank you, panel. See you next, and I'm sorry that you were hurt. I want you to feel okay. See you next Sunday.